Hello, my beautiful friends. So, tonight's topic is creating your own rituals. So, I sat down to create my own ancestor ritual, and I journaled about it before I did it, and I have lots and lots of thoughts. I'm going to try not to go down 40 different rabbit holes because I totally could, about all sorts of pieces of this process and what I think about it. But, um, disclaimer, I am not an expert on religious or any kind of history or you know churchy stuff or witchcraft or anything. Like, I'm not an expert. I'm just, this is my spiel about how I do things and how I think about the world. So I'm not a scholar in religious studies, so keep that in mind. So first thing I had to think about was the difference between ritual and tradition, and I've talked about that before on the channel. And I talk about that all the time with my students because we look at different stories where there's ritual, and then we look at stories where there's tradition. And sometimes traditions are followed blindly. And I would argue the same is true with rituals, right? So the only experience I have with rituals and traditions um, come from my own experience in the church. So the ritual of Mass in an Anglican church and also in a Roman Catholic church, there is the ritual itself, but then there are rituals within that ritual, right? So, you know, if you've been to a Roman Catholic church or a conservative Anglican church, and I think even the modern Anglican churches, Episcopal churches do this, the first thing that happens is somebody comes in and lights the candles. And that's like, when we were kids, that was when our mom would give us the elbow, and that's the shut up time, right? You shut up. And then there's usually what we would call the get in hymn. You sing the hymn to come in. And in walks the priest and another altar boy carrying a crucifix, and they walk from the back to the front, and then the service starts, and it usually starts with confession, and then there's lessons, and then there's the gospel, and then there's the sermon, and then there's communion if your church celebrates it. If you're Roman Catholic, it is literally transforming the bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ. If you're Protestant, if you're Anglican, or if you're a different denomination, there's varying beliefs about what happens to the bread and the wine. Then there's more prayers, and then the get out hymn, and then they extinguish the candles, and then out you go. And then if you're smart, you try to avoid the priest or the pastor by going out a side door, right? So that's the ritual of church, of Mass, and then there are rituals within that. Now, in the Anglican church that I was raised in, it was very, very conservative, and it broke off of the Episcopal church in the mid to late 70s when women were ordained. So they are called the continuing church. They continue the church. And the 1923 Book of Common Prayer differed only from the Book of Common Prayer from England, in that in the places where it talked about like the king and the queen and all that, it was changed to president and senators and all that. So that is the book that my church, if I would still be going to an Anglican church, that's the same book that is still used today. And then the Episcopal Church, which is the modern American Anglican Church, has varying degrees of conservative to liberal services that can be done, and all kinds of different practices are adopted and things like that. So I grew up in a very traditional, very conservative, um, mass-driven, confession-given sort of scenario. And so it's hard to separate what is ritual and what is tradition. So I think one of the most beautiful things I've ever attended, one of my colleagues at my previous school in New Jersey, her husband had passed away, and she's Jewish, or they were Jewish. And the family sat Shiva. And I had heard about Shiva, but I had never experienced it because I'm not Jewish. So I am fascinated by other religions, all world religions. Like, I'm interested in all of them. Um, I just think there's so many beautiful parts of all different religions and spiritual practices, and I just think all of them are interesting. So I attended, and I thought that's a good example of both a tradition and a ritual. So in the culture of Judaism, when somebody dies, you sit Shiva. And then there's the ritual of sitting Shiva, because like the chairs have to be a certain way. There's a certain process that things happen. And that's really the difference between a ritual and a tradition. A ritual has specific steps that have to happen for some kind of goal at the end. So in the church, the ritual of mass, the goal is to, communicate the teachings of Christ and share the body and blood of Christ, and to inspire us to go out and do good works in the name of Christ, right? That's the goal of mass, and to, to honor the word. And then the goal of Shiva, the ritual of Shiva, is to honor the dead. Like, they're both in and of themselves beautiful things. And then the traditions that happen, like in the Anglican Church, in the conservative Anglican Church, there are all different kind of things that happen. Like, when you go into church, you genuflect if there's a candle lit at the front of the altar, which means that there are blessed hosts in the little cabinet that's in the wall or behind the curtain or wherever. Churches put it different places. That candle is lit, that means that there's blessed hosts somewhere back there. And so you have to genuflect. But if it's not lit, you don't have to genuflect. But people still do because they don't remember the rule, right? During the Nicene Creed, there are different creeds in the church. There's the Nicene Creed and the Apostles' Creed. During the creed, there's a line or two that talks about when word became flesh among us, and you genuflect. In some Anglican churches, the priests go prostrate, like they lay down and then go completely flat. And other churches, in the church I came up in, we would genuflect and we would go down and then come back up. Some churches don't do that at all. During when they read the gospel, some priests will come out with the altar boy and they'll read it in the middle of the congregation in the sort of the hallway that goes between the two sides of the church, gospel and the epistle side, right? And then when they say the gospel, you cross your forehead, you cross your lips, you cross your heart. Some people do that, some people don't, right? So there's all kinds of traditions based on what church you were raised in or how you were taught, and they add to your meaning of the ritual, but they aren't the ritual themselves, right? And so my concern, having grown up in such a conservative thing, is that we excuse me, we never want to do things just because, right? We want meaning to be attached to the tradition, and we want meaning to be in the ritual. So there is great comfort in a even still, like, even though I'm not really part of the church anymore, I find great comfort going into an Anglican service. It's memorized. I know it by heart. My husband was raised Roman Catholic. He can go down to Catholic church and he knows the service, because I went to a Catholic college and I attend a lot of Catholic masses with the family. I know that, and it's very similar to the Anglican service. I know their service pretty well. There's great comfort in that, and I don't want to take that away from anybody who cherishes that. But I think there's a danger in becoming complacent or apathetic, because the words aren't yours and you just kind of say them. And if you're tired or you're not feeling it, you're just there for the heck of it, it doesn't mean anything. And we can be very critical of organized religion in that way, but the same is true in pagan practices and Wiccan practices and agnostic practices and Druidic practice. When the rituals don't belong to you and they belong to somebody else, you have to make them yours. Now, that's not to say you can't make the Mass or the service or the celebration yours, something that's made by somebody else. It doesn't, not to say that you can't, but if you're part owner and if you have some skin in the game, right, it's going to mean more to you. And so I was thinking about that because I still use my Book of Common Prayer. There are prayers that I absolutely love, that I grew up with, that I love. I love hymns. I still love hymns. I still sing hymns. There's parts of the church that I very much love. Probably not, I would say the politics of the church is the thing I don't love. But I also think that it's important to remember where these rituals came from. I mean, if you believe that the Bible is the unfettered Word of God, I believe it's incomplete, and I believe it's missing a whole lot, and I believe politics has shaped it over time. I believe it was initially inspired by God, but I I don't know how I feel about the rest of it. But if you believe that is the word of God, nowhere in there does it say, like, genuflect when they say the name of Jesus. Well, actually, I think it does say the name at the name of Jesus, but it doesn't say only boys can light the candles. I grew up in a very conservative church. Girls couldn't do anything except wear hair coverings and serve meat and potatoes to men after service. So a lot of that stuff, the rituals were created by whomever, and over time they've been altered, and over time, they weren't rituals that Jesus created. Like Jesus said, go and feed the poor, clothe, the poor, look after the widows, heal the sick, like go and do all these things, and teach everybody about light and love. That's what he said. But like some of this stuff, like genuflect when you come into the church if there's blessed wafers up in the church, like that, some pope somewhere, some priest or bishop somewhere said that's what we should do, and that's why we do it. And we've been doing it so long we don't know why we do it. So I think it's really important, if we're in a spiritual practice not tied to a denomination, if we're independent as I am, to start to create our own rituals. We always I'm guilty of this, and this is why I really tackle this. I will go on, I'm like, oh, I need a ritual for Alba Nylar's coming up, Astera slash spring equinox. Let me find a good ritual to do for Astera. I call it Alba Nylar. Let me go find a good ritual for that. And then I'm looking at the ritual and I'm like, well, that doesn't resonate with me. I don't use those words. I don't celebrate those gods and goddesses. Like that's not my jam. No judgment to the author of the ritual. But when I read it, it's a ritual that they've created because it brings in tremendous and amazing healing and meaning to them. Doesn't resonate with me at all. So then I thought, well, you're a well-educated woman, BRG. Write your own damn rituals. You don't have to rely on everybody else. And you don't have to be well-educated to write your own rituals. You just have to sit down and think about what it is you want to do. So I did that. I sat down and I wrote my own. I took some time, and I thought about different rituals that I've experienced from all different cultures that I've experienced, whether it's Judaism or Christianity, and they all kind of have the same elements, right? The first thing that happens in all of them, I wrote it down because I don't want to miss anything when I'm telling you this. Sort of the first thing that happens is that you create a space, right? Like right now I'm talking to you. I'm not in like prayer space. I'm not in meditation space. I'm not in space where I'm committing this time to this activity. So I need to start by creating the space. In the church, that's the lighting of the candles and the singing of the get-in tune and the walking in of the priest and the crucifix. What is it that brings you meaning to set the space? So for me, now it's lighting a candle, lighting incense, and just doing deep breathing. I do things in three, the Celtic way. 3 deep breaths I am in spiritual space. I am in the spiritual space. And so you can do that anywhere. You can do that in your bathroom. You can do it in the woods. You can do it anywhere. For me, that's what I do. You break away from regular space and you create a sacred space, whatever that means to you, and however it is you get there. Like I light candles and incense. Maybe you ring a bell. Maybe you smudge the area. Like whatever it is, that brings meaning to you, and don't be afraid to change it. Like you light a thing and you're like, that was way too much stuff to do before getting into my space. I don't want to do all that. I want to light a candle and go. Okay, you have permission from the universe to do whatever brings you meaning. So you create your space, and then when you're in your space, you can meditate, you can pray, you can pull cards, you can journal, you can do whatever it is that brings meaning. You can read a passage from something. You can do a blessing. You can place things on an altar. You can create an altar. You can create your altar ahead of time if you want to. I was working on an ancestral ritual. That's, really what I wanted to create. So I had created my space ahead of time, my ancestral, because I have a shelf that's like sort of my ancestral altar. And, I had that space set ahead of time. So I had gone, I had, those of you who have met me or know me know that I am such a nerd. So I had gone through my Ancestry.com and my 23andMe, and I wrote back ancestors as far as back as I could get them in both softwares. And then I wrote their names in a list. And so I wrote my own prayer, my own ancestor prayer. I wrote, and then I read off the names of my ancestors, starting with my mom and my dad, um, and then I go all the way back. And I include in there my brother, even though he's not my ancestor, but I include him, and I include my aunts and uncles as well. And I just go through the whole list, and it's, I don't know, a lot of names, because I go back to the 1700s and my mom's side. And so, my ancestor altar is created ahead of time. I light candles and I bless the space with incense. And I didn't do this, but you can place offerings of food or money or items from nature or whatever. I don't place offerings out like that. Um, I you know I You could put personal relics on there, memorabilia of your family. I Mine's more in my head than in a physical space. Music is very important, so I play music. Um, you can ask permission, so you can open with a prayer or a meditation or a quote, something that brings you meaning. Doesn't have to be the same thing all the time. It can be different. You ask permission from your guides or from God. You ask permission in my ancestral ceremony, just asking permission to the ancestors, um, and inviting them to join me in the ceremony. That felt very important, that I didn't just like assume that they wanted to hang out with me, like that I asked permission for them to come, whichever ones were available and interested in hanging out with me. It felt right to ask permission. And then welcoming them, and then, calling in the four winds or the four directions, the elements, if that's important to you. Mother Earth and Father Sky and Sister Ocean, like if you want to call those in to be in your space. You can write letters to your ancestors and then read them. You can write the letter right there. You can tell stories or, remembrances of things that have, happened in your lifetime. You can ask questions. You can ask for guidance. You can sit quietly. You can sing. You can write poetry. Whatever brings you meaning. For me, like in that space, I just want to think about them and I want to talk to them and just like have a conversation with them and talk about wisdom and love and light and how, um, if there's any ancestral trauma that I need to think about. I'm not, today's March 4th, and that's very much, my mother, Karen, was very much a March 4th kind of person. She didn't, um, she didn't live in the past, and she didn't raise us to live in the past. So I tend not to like go back to like traumas in the past and things like that. I tend to be a person who marches forward and just keeps on trucking. And I give myself like space and time to deal with something, but then I try to move on. Not to say that I don't remember things that happened in the past and that they don't inform things in the future, but I don't live in the past. My brother doesn't live in the past either. So, like sort of that March 4th spirit. But, I sit quietly and I just think about them and I honor them and I ask for their wisdom, if I'm dealing with an issue. And then you definitely want to close the loop. That's, a programming thing too. You definitely want something to close the ceremony, like thanking them, turning out your candles, playing a song at the end, having a thought, to leave with. I always end with it's a Christian prayer, go and love and go into the world to love and serve, because that's really what I believe we should all do. Um, but my ancestor celebration, my ancestor ceremony is really creating that space. Like the intention of the ritual is to create a space and a time where I'm honoring my ancestors, asking for guidance, and then thinking about how I can apply that guidance in my life. And that's different than, that ritual is something I can do all the time, and it doesn't matter whether it's Alban Eiler or Yule or whatever. Like that's something separate. Those are other rituals that I will create for those. But I like what I do because to me it doesn't involve a lot of stuff. I think one of the things that really turned me off in organized religion is all the stuff that you had to have in order to be a true Anglican. Like, I always thought, like, Jesus wouldn't care if you used a Dixie cup for communion because he would just be happy that you were honoring him. But there's so much, well, that Dixie cup isn't good enough for Jesus. You have to have this solid gold $4 million chalice. Well, I think he kind of said you didn't have to have all that nonsense, right? So I feel like I'm very tied to not having all the stuff. Or if I have the stuff, that the stuff has meaning, right? If I have stuff, which I do, right? I have the incense, that whatever I'm using has meaning and isn't just to impress somebody or to, have, I don't know, false errors or whatever. So creating a ritual, an ancestor ritual, is all about how you want to connect with your ancestors and how you want to honor them. There is no right or wrong answer. The right answer is in your heart. So, we read this stuff and and all traditions do this, whether it's Christianity or Judaism or the pagan world, the Wiccan world, the witchcraft world, the, Muslim world. It's like we have to do it this way or it's not right. Don't buy into that. That's just a way to separate us from light and love, right? That's just a separation technique. You connect with your higher power however it is you want. You connect with your ancestors however it is you want. Whatever brings you meaning, light, and love. That's the bottom line. So, I am wishing you all the best in light and love. Take care. I would love to hear your suggestions down below, things that you do that bring you meaning. Please put them down below, like, subscribe, and share. Share a video with others. We'll get up to 500. I'm not going to start a paid channel because that's way too much math for me. But it would be nice to have 500. That's my goal for the year, is to get up to 500. We'll see. Anyway, wishing you the best in light and love. Be well. Bye-bye.